What's up, House of All? We're back with our top 20 centers. So our first slide here is going to be our honorable mention slide. There's a lot of good centers, so we only did a list including the top 20. These guys we kind of had just falling short of that point. So if you're looking deeper in your drafts, these are names who you might be able to still pick up who are going to be able to provide good value. So quickly, we'll talk about them. Won't spend too much time here, but we have Wendell Carter Jr., Porzingis, Draymond Green, Steven Adams, Zubac, Miles Turner, Jakob Poeltl, Isaiah Stewart, Sengun, and Bomba. I don't know if you want to talk about any of these guys in particular, Alex.
Um, I feel like we have to mention Bomba for sure, just given how he's shown up in the slides. I know you're a big fan of him.
We love Bomba, man. He's got a whole song dedicated to him.
Yeah. So there's him. I think Şengün is gonna do a lot better this season. I definitely see him. I don't know, just getting more minutes, more stats across the board. How do you feel?
I agree. I think also depending if you're in a points or categories league, like my value for these guys kind of varies.
Yep.
So if in a categories league, for example, like Draymond Green and Sengun are guys who can really help you in potentially the assist category, like guys who are able to play the center position and still be really productive as playmakers. It's kind of hard to find, so point that out. But
I
yeah,
agree with that. I think Adams, if you're playing in a maybe a deeper format, like you can usually get him pretty late in drafts, and he'll give you blocks, rebounds, big man stats.
for sure. But yeah, one thing I'll say before we actually get into the top 20 players we have here is that we're going based off of Yahoo position criteria. So if Yahoo is currently letting you play this guy as a center in your lineup, that's all we're going off of. We're not kind of determining who's a center and who's not here. So yeah, should we get started with number 20?
Let's go.
All right. So number 20, we're starting off with John Collins of the Atlanta Hawks. So he's able to play both power forward and center for you. And I mean, his averages last year on the screen. So really good points, rebounds, assists. His value, I think, with DeJounte Murray coming to play in Atlanta this upcoming season might take a little bit of a hit. And it seems like for the past few years, Atlanta's been kind of on the bubble with potentially trading him. But yeah, just a quality center. Not really your traditional center you might have for a fantasy basketball team, but he's able to really fill it up for the points, rebounds, and assist categories. You might not see as much defensive stats with this guy on average, but yeah, I think a solid guy to pick up later in the drafts. So we can jump to number 19 here. So at number 19, you got Clint Capella, also playing alongside him in Atlanta there. So Capella, he's not going to get you as many points as Collins, but when it comes to rebounds, blocks, he's really going to be able to provide great value there. If you're in a categories league, especially, this might be someone you're kind of considering depending what categories you want to target. If you want to do any punting, anything like that, Capella could be potentially someone you consider. But yeah, definitely a really good player, fantastic rebounder, good enough to take it at number 19 for our list there. So for 17, we have two players tied. So we'll start off talking about Robert Williams here. So Robert Williams played really productive with the Boston Celtics last year. And I feel like because of that, he is kind of getting drafted pretty high in a lot of these drafts recently. But for rebounds and especially the defensive stats is I think where he brings his big value.
Yep.
So blocks, for example, I think even in these recent games you can see like having a 4 block game for this guy, not uncommon. So those normally are big fantasy point bringers, very valuable that way. Yeah, anything to add so far, Alex?
Yeah, blocks and steals, Robert Williams. He'll do good for you in a categories league. And then also in a points league, you give him 20, 25 minutes, like easy, like easy top 50 numbers right there.
For sure. Yeah, and I think he's just locked in as a starter on that team, should be getting those minutes, so good player there. So we'll move to who he's tied with. So we have Jaren Jackson Jr. So I'm a little bit higher on Jaren Jackson Jr. than Alex here. But Jaron Jackson Jr. is going to be starting off the season most likely injured, so you might not see him actually playing games until it kind of sounds like November at this point. I guess we'll see how his recovery process goes. But I think Jaron Jackson Jr. is kind of a sleeper for the center you can get. He's really good at scoring, averaged 16.3 points last year, and I think that could actually go up. I think you can even see in some of these recent games, like he had a 28-point game, definitely has the potential to provide really good value there. And defensively, I also really like his shot blocking ability. So you can kind of
Hmm.
see in the recent games there, 4 blocks, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. But he was really filling it up there for us. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I've seen playoff games where he had like 6 blocks in a game. So if you can afford to stash a player for a little bit, pretty good option.
absolutely. But we'll jump on to number 16 of our list here. So we're looking at Yusuf Nurkic on the Blazers. So the Blazers are kind of going to be an interesting team to follow. I'm not really sure how him and Jeremy Grant are going to look playing next to each other next year. But I will say, towards the end of the season and when he was actually playing, it looks like, as you can see, kind of February of last year, I guess he's already kind of starting to wind down the amount of games he was playing with some injuries and stuff. But he was putting up some big games, so he can be definitely a big points contributor, over 10 rebounds a game, which you like to see for centers. 2.8 assists is actually a pretty respectable average for a position there as well. Defensively, I'd say he isn't really on the same level as those last two guys, but he's still able to get you some steals and blocks here and there. So yeah, just a solid, well-rounded center, good points league guy for sure.
Yeah. So moving on to the 15th spot, we've got Jonas here, and just looking at his numbers, close to 18 points, 11.4 rebounds, and 2.6 assists. I feel like he's another center that's more offensively inclined. Will definitely give you the defensive stats, but if you're playing in potentially a categories league and you're leaning more towards points and assists, I think he brings that. I know he's on the Pelicans. Aiden's a big supporter of them.
I am. I am. I
Yeah.
think his fit next to Zion Williamson is going to be an interesting thing to see this year.
Yeah, you think anything drops here?
I think it will. I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with 18 points per game. Like you have CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, and Zion. It's going to be hard to get enough touches to keep up with the points count there. Rebounds, Zion's not a huge rebounder, so I think he should be able to continue putting up some good stats there. So yeah, I think he's a decent player, and around you know 15th best center feels like the right range for him.
Yeah, you should. Anyone listening should definitely trust Aiden's opinions on Pelicans players. He's one of probably 5 fans they have. I don't know.
We got a huge fan base out here. I don't know what you're saying.
All right, number 14 is Christian Wood. 18 points, 10 boards, 2 assists. I really like him on Dallas. I also think he's a bit of a sleeper because in a lot of drafts that I've done, he's going in the 50, 60 range, which I think is a little too low for him. I think he also does bring you pretty good defensive stats, just kind of going off a very small sample size in his last few games. You can see he had a game with 2 steals and a block and a steal, and then just the steal. So definitely gives you numbers kind of across the board. All right, we'll move on to Jarrett Allen. Jarrett Allen, I was a lot higher on Allen, I think, than Aiden. I've drafted him on my teams, I think, a couple times, and I do like his game. Even beside Evan Mobley, he does, to me, seem like the number one option. And he'll give you solid defensive numbers, along with 16 points, 10 rebounds, and the occasional assist that you kind of see here. I think Jarrett Allen is a center that's a lot more on the defensive side. All right, we'll move on to DeAndre Ayton. At number 11, I am not the biggest fan of Ayton, but you can't hate on the stats that he puts up with 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.4 assists. Plays on the Suns, and he usually goes relatively high in drafts. I haven't seen too much of his game, but I think he does put up really solid defensive numbers. So category leagues, if you're looking at blocks, steals, I think DeAndre Ayton is a good addition to that sort of build. So Evan Mobley tied for 11th with DeAndre Ayton. So he had a really good rookie season here, like finishing with 15 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists. And I think that continues to, I think these stats get better as he goes into his second year. He's a little bit more confident, more, I don't know, set in his role on the team. It's not going to be changing. He seems to play well with Jarrett Allen, which is something I was a little bit worried about when he started. I thought they would kind of, I don't know, I thought one would kind of take over and hold the share of the stats, but they seem to be split pretty evenly. I think Mobley is a high efficiency player, so if you're playing in a points league, he'll definitely give you great numbers, and if you're playing in a categories league, depending on the build again, I think he makes a great addition to your team.
Agreed. Yeah, I think one thing that I was kind of having a tough time deciding is who I'd rather have between Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. I feel like both of those players offer their, kind of similar range. For me, I ended up kind of saying I like Mobley a little bit better. I think I like the fact that he's young and he's just going into his second season in the league. And, based on what his rookie stats were, normally you see them jump a little bit as a sophomore. So I feel like he's going to be a little bit more productive than Jarrett Allen overall, but I think they're very close. And, you can't really go wrong with picking up either guy to play some center minutes for you.
For sure. I think Evan Mobley's also forward eligible, whereas Jarrett Allen's just the center.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. So yeah, if you can have a player who's able to play multiple positions on your team, those are often guys I like to target because it's going to kind of maximize the amount of games you can easily fit into your lineup each week.
For sure.
All right, so we'll move on to our top 10. So we're going to start off with Nikola Vucevic of the Chicago Bulls. So he's put up some really good seasons in fantasy past. I feel like since he's come to Chicago, he's been a little bit less productive than you'd like to see. But he's still averaging 18 points, 11 rebounds, and 3.2 assists, which is really good for a center there. Defensively, I feel like that's not really what he's known for. Definitely kind of that offensive center build once again. But yeah, good player, really productive player for a points league. Categories league, as long as you're not chasing the defensive stats, he might be a guy who's decent enough to pick up there. So number 9, kind of on the other side, we have Rudy Gobert. So Gobert, monster rebounder, monster defensive player. On the season, averaging 15.6 points, which isn't too bad at all. Playing next to Karl-Anthony Towns, I feel like, is now creating an interesting dynamic for him. We'll have to see how those two guys work together, but I don't expect the defensive stats to fall off too much. I think his blocks are just something that's always going to be there with Rudy Gobert. Rebounds, I think he still averages above 10 per game. I'm not sure if, him and Towns will kind of take a couple away from each other. That might hurt a little bit there. But, yeah, points league, still a great player. Blocks give you lots of points in points league, plus all those rebounds and points he's been contributing. Once we start kind of looking towards potentially categories leagues, rebounds, blocks, really big contributor there for sure.
Yeah, I don't see the offensive rebounding decreasing at all. And that, depending on the game, is maybe 30% of his rebounds. I could also see potentially the points going up, but we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to follow up with how clear that's there. All right, so number 8, we have Pascal Siakam of the Toronto Raptors. So I really like what he offers points-wise for a center. Like last year, he averaged 23 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 5.3 assists. Like those are all incredible, stats for someone who's center eligible. Like 5 assists for a center, that's, something to keep in mind if you're in a categories league. And defensively, he's definitely a guy who holds his own, really good at steals, blocks, so he'll be able to get you some here and there too. So, yeah, I think Siakam, very good player. Definitely someone you can look at kind of, that second, third round of fantasy drafts, depending how deep your league is.
Yeah, he averaged 1.2 steals. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm looking at projected stats. That's my bad.
That's all good. That's all good.
Let me find his stats. I'm interested in him. So he averaged, yeah, about zero point 0.6 blocks and 1.3 steals per game. Those are his defensive numbers.
Those are pretty decent. I feel like the steal's definitely a little bit better there. Like averaging no steal a game, that's something that interests me.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on though. So we got Domantas Sabonis next here. So Sabonis playing in Sacramento, so I think he's going to be a guy who's pretty competitive still. He's been a great fantasy player in years past. You look at his points, rebounds, really good playmaker there as well. So can really fill up the stat sheet. Defensively, he's been able to be kind of similar to what Siakam offers, I think. Steals, pretty decent. Blocks, kind of, not as good, but still is able to produce a little bit there. Overall, really well-rounded player. And if you can get him in the second round of your fantasy draft, I think you're doing pretty good there.
Yeah, points, rebounds, assists. I think Sabonis does an incredible job, especially rebounds. Like that can be a valuable category. It looks like his defensive numbers took a small hit after the trade to Sacramento. His blocks went from 0.5 down to 0.3, and the steals went from 1 down to 0.9. Now, that is over a small sample size, but just something to note.
Yeah, not the best defensive center out there, but yeah, his offense, I think, makes up for a large part of it. All right, so number 6, we have Bam Adebayo. So I feel like the last couple centers we've had on our list are fairly interchangeable, depending on your opinion. You got Sabonis, Siakam, Gobert. If you want to, comment below and make an argument for any of those centers, I can be convinced either way. I like what Bam Adebayo offers, though. I think he is going to continue to take a climb year after year, like he seems to do. Points, rebounds, pretty good. Assists, not too bad either for a center. Defensively, though, I think is kind of where he makes his mark. Really good for steals for a center, and is pretty good against some blocks here and there as well, despite only being 6'9" for a center. But yeah, I feel like he's a really good modern day center, and someone you can potentially look at grabbing in that second round of a fantasy draft.
Yeah, he's usually goes around there. I think maybe between 15 and 20. I think Bam goes. Okay, so next up is Karl Anthony Towns, and I was a little bit higher on Karl Anthony Towns than Aiden initially was, and yeah, you look at his points, and 24.6 points, 9.8 rebounds, 3.6 assists. Definitely more on the offensive side. I think he's a good player to have, especially since he seems to be falling recently. Defensively, though, I'm just pulling up his numbers, and he averages a block and a steal per game, which I think is pretty nice, whether you play in a points league or a categories league. I think he helps you out there. So the next name we have is Anthony Davis, and very similar points, very similar stats across the board with Davis here. I think Anthony Davis takes a big step up this season. Obviously, knock on wood, we hope he stays healthy. Just look up Anthony Davis's stats here. So Anthony Davis does bring better defensive numbers. He's averaging 2.3 blocks and a steal per game. So defensively, Anthony Davis is he's better than Towns with those numbers, and the other stats are very, very similar. So I guess the real difference between the two there is risk tolerance, whether you think Anthony Davis stays healthy. I know Towns did have the one season where he missed quite a few games, but if you look at his seasons before then, he plays the majority of games. A little bit of a tank.
Yeah, I think you were a little bit higher on Towns. I think, we were both had them at, 4th and 5th on our list, so it ended up kind of being about tied on our list there. But yeah, I think Anthony Davis, I think I like his role on the Lakers to be projected a little bit more than what I like with Karl Anthony Towns. I think, Anthony Davis, I kind of expect to be forced to be that number one guy for the Lakers for the majority of the year here. And when we look at the Timberwolves, I'm not really sure how Gobert is going to affect what Towns is doing. Anthony Edwards seems to be kind of needing to get more and more touches as he continues to progress as a star in this league.
Valid. Yeah.
But yeah, Anthony Davis definitely I think is going to be taking a jump in the stats we see here. And I mean, like you were saying about his defensive stats, like seems like 2 blocks a game is almost automatic for him year over year.
Yeah, definitely higher side on blocks there. I don't know many players that average about 2 a game.
For sure. Yeah, one of the better players in the league when it comes to it, for sure.
Yeah, next we got Embiid with just monster points, really good rebounding, and I guess a little bit more on the offensive side as he is. Even with Harden there, I'd say Embiid's probably the number one option, and that's kind of explains the high assist numbers for a center. Defensively, I feel like without looking it up, I know Embiid's high on. I want to say he gets good blocks, but I will check that anyways. Yeah, block and a half per game, 1 steal. Pretty big numbers there. So points leagues, you want this guy. The only I guess thing to factor in with Embiid is again whether he stays healthy. I think prior to last season, the most games he had ever played was 64. So if he has another game like the previous season where he's playing back to backs, plays around 70 games, I think you have a really good player in Embiid.
Yeah, I think you captured it there. I think, it really just comes down to how many games he plays. Like, if Embiid plays enough on the court, I wouldn't be surprised if he's competing with, around that Jokic range for being the number one center, or even the number one fantasy player for the whole season. But I feel like it's just like, is this guy going to stay on the court enough games to be worth it?
Yeah, like per minute per game, Embiid's like usually top 5, like almost guaranteed.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, moving on. We've got Giannis at number 2, and I guess for obvious reasons, he puts up just crazy offensive stats, and his defensive stats, like I believe, match this. Like he's one of the I think more well-rounded players in the league. So he puts up these crazy offensive stats, and then he also gets you a block and a half and a steal per game. So if you're building a team that's I guess more like relying on those defensive stats, he'll really help you out with those too. And the only person who seems to really kind of put up these numbers offensively would be Embiid that I've seen. Maybe Jokic.
Yeah, Giannis is he's a beast, and I think what I like about Giannis too is I was trying to look at the stats here, but I feel like he's just a guy who stays healthy. Like you're not going to see him missing that many games, compared to like some of the other guys like we were talking about with Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis before him there.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
played in 67 games in this previous season.
So yeah, that's pretty respectable there. And yeah. So yeah, definitely a guy who's getting out on the court. So gotta respect it.
Yeah, we'll move on to our number 1 pick, and yeah, if it isn't obvious by now, it is Jokic, who puts up 27 points, 13.8 rebounds, and 8 assists. Just absolute monster numbers. If you play in a points league, like Jokic is just I've gone against a player that had Jokic, and it was not a good time. Like I think Jokic dropped 100-point fantasy game, and this was in the finals of our league, so that was great. Just Jokic doing Jokic things. Man played in 74 games on the season, put up a block and about a steal and a half per game. Like you're essentially looking at the entire Denver Nuggets roster right here.
Yeah, I mean, Jokic has been the number one fantasy player, I think, for the last 2 seasons running now for a reason. Like he's just like he's like a triple double machine, and he plays center, which is one of the harder positions to get good value when it comes to fantasy basketball. So I think his role now that Denver's getting healthy with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. maybe takes a little bit of a hit, but I mean, I don't think his stats are going to be dropping off too much.
Yeah, I could potentially see the points going down with the assists going up. I don't think the rebounds will be affected too much.
No, I don't think either of those guys will be competing with him for rebounds much.
But yeah, that is our list. If you have we went through 30 centers today. If you've got different centers, definitely drop them in the comments if we've overlooked anybody.
For sure. But yeah, thanks for watching the video, guys.